Good morning, Leader.
Good morning. My name is Councillor Martin Hill. I'm Chairman of this committee and Leader of the County Council. Welcome to this April meeting of the LCC Executive, and I welcome you all. And on this very sunny spring morning, with hopefully more hope that will be at the end of this very difficult period the country has faced over the last 12 months. So without further ado, I'll move straight on to the roll call, please, and also apologies for absence. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. We have the following. Can members of the executive please confirm that they are present when I call their name? Councillor Mrs. Badwell.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Davies.
Present.
Councillor Paul. I believe we have his apologies.
That's correct.
Councillor Mrs. Woolley.
Present.
Councillor Worth.
Present.
Councillor Young. Councillor Young.
Present.
Thank you. We also have the following councillors present: Councillor Parker, Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, and Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. We have the following officers in attendance. Officers are not required to say they are present. We have Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive, James Drury, Executive Director Commercial, Glenn Garrett, Executive Director of Adult Care and Community Wellbeing, Andy Gutherson, Executive Director of Place, Heather Sandy, Executive Director of Children's Services, and Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services.
Thank you very much for that, Rachel. Okay, I'll move on to item 2 then, which are there any declarations of councillor interest, please? I'll pause now and just wait to see if there are any such interest to be declaring. No indications, so there are none.
Mr. Chairman,
oh, sorry, Mrs. Bradwell. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, it's the last paper, which is a pink paper. I will be not taking part in that part of the meeting because actually at the moment my husband's working part-time for the coroner's service.
Thank you for that. Yes, so there's the paper number 6, sorry, is a confidential paper, so the press and public will be asked to leave at that point, but you will also be making your departure as well. Thank you for that declaration. Thank you. Okay, move on to item 3 then, which is announcements by the leader, executive councillors and directors. Well, I've just got 2 announcements to make, really. This is the last executive meeting of this quadrennial of the County Council. Obviously, we have elections coming up next month, so this is the final executive meeting we'll be holding. And 2 members of the executive have indicated they're not restanding for election in May. That is Councillors Young and Councillors Worth. So I'd just like to say on behalf of the executive as chairman of this committee, thank you both very much for all the work you've done over the years. Barry, you've been 12 years on the executive, or 8, I think, a long time, and Nick has been 8 years on. Not only that, before they were on the executive, they also had a very leading role. So I think we will miss them a lot because they've given tremendous service to both the County Council and to their areas. And we wish them very well in their well-earned semi-retirement, I'm sure, because I'm sure both of them will still have plenty of things to be getting on with outside of the County Council. So thank you very much, both of you, and thank you very much for all that you've done for the people and the residents of Lincolnshire. Okay, I'll move on then. Any other announcements, anybody, please? No? Okay, then we move on to item 4, which is the minutes of this, the executive meeting held on the 2nd of March. Has anybody got any challenge to those minutes before I sign them as a true and accurate record? Again, I'll just pause and then wait for any challenges.
None indicated, Leader.
Right, thank you very much. So I will, after the meeting, I will get those electronically signed. Thank you. Okay then, so we move then on to item 5, which is the draft 1 council commissioning framework. So we do have a commissioning policy, but it is time now that I think we refresh that. So I presume that James Drury now is going to come in and just talk us through some of the changes that are being proposed. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, and Sophie's on the call as well and can add and provide some additional details. So exactly as you say, Leader, this tries to update and pull together some existing policy that we have, but also ensures that we align it to our new corporate plan and also to our one council approach. So I guess some of the things that it refers to is about listening more to our residents. So we currently do listen to our residents, of course we do in commissioning processes, but it's about increasing the importance and the priority of that within this process and ensuring that that's undertaken consistently across our council. It defines a set of principles, it defines what commissioning is, and it talks about our vision and aim. And so it's a fairly short document, but it's a starter, if you like, around our approach to commissioning that we can then use and adopt when we are working in commissioning environments across our council. So I'll ask Sophie now just to provide a little bit more detail and then happy to take any questions or comments, Leader. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Sophie.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Leader. My name is Sophie Reeve. I'm the County Council's Assistant Director for Commercial. As James indicated, this is really a refresh of our current commissioning policies. It was signalled, I think, the need for change in the corporate review that took place in the council at the back end of 2019. The key finding of that corporate review was that our commissioning didn't take place within a one council corporate context. And what we've tried to do with the new commissioning framework is put that right and certainly link the corporate plan with our approach to commissioning. So commissioning is there to deliver on the outcomes and priorities set in the corporate plan, and we have to follow a consistent one council approach to that. So those are the key deliverables. If we just quickly look at Appendix A, go to page 18, I'll just quickly take you through some of the changes from our existing approach. So what we've done in terms of commissioning is we've redefined it. The definition is more straightforward, it's more simple. What we say is it's the process for deciding how to use the total resources available to meet need, improve outcomes in a way that's efficient, effective and sustainable. We make, as we've just discussed, an explicit reference to the corporate plan. So the corporate plan becomes the corporate context in which commissioning must take place. So I think that goes some distance to meeting the concerns raised by the peer review. We also recognise that there are different ways of achieving commissioning. We can contract for services, we can deliver services ourselves. That's always been the case. We've always recognised that. We've been fairly neutral about the approach taken. We select the best approach for the circumstances. What we've added now is a recognition that individuals can commission on their own behalf through the use of direct payments, for example, in social care. And that's another important and increasingly important form of commissioning. We've kept the analyse, plan, do, review model. We think that works really well. And certainly with the other authorities who reviewed their commissioning, they were all still taking that approach. We've added a vision. So the vision is new. That talks about what commissioning means to us. And we've also added an overarching aim. That's new. And it sets out what we hope what commissioning will achieve. The language used in our vision reflects and borrows from the corporate plan. There are very close links to that. So we talk about being ethical and fair in the way we use resources. We talk about social value, promoting economic productivity, and supporting community needs and priorities so people have the opportunity to live a full life and have high aspirations. Principles, we've always had principles, as James has already alluded to. We've added some new principles. So one of the first principles we've added, which wasn't explicit before, is that we will be resident focused. So we will listen to our residents and we will better understand what they need, and we will reflect that in the decisions we make with regard to commissioning. We also say for the first time explicitly that we will champion Lincolnshire. So we will commission to build our local economy and to protect our local environment. That's never been set out as explicitly as it is now. We also say that we will innovate. Again, that's a new principle. So when we design services now, part of the commissioning process will be to understand what the potential technology has in transforming the way we meet need through those services. So that will be another stage in the commissioning process. Commissioning will continue to be locally driven, so strategic key decisions will continue to be made by councillors, and it will be for councillors to make sure that commissioning delivers on the corporate plan. We're introducing a new options appraisal mechanism, so we look at the best service delivery model for whether we should buy services, whether we should deliver services in-house. Is there another way of better meeting our objectives? And finally, the final new principle is one council commissioning. So we need to commission in a consistent way across the council for all service areas, and all corporate services need to be involved in that commission. So those services such as finance, community engagement, commercial, in a similar way to the service areas. So those are the main changes that have been made, Leader. I don't intend to say anything else, but very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that very much. So, Councillor Parker, it's obviously scrutiny, you've had a look at this as well, haven't they?
Sure, yes. What Sophie said goes a long way to saying much the same thing that we said within our scrutiny meeting. I think some of the points that we can learn from it and perhaps use in other locations. We use the experience of other councils, although I think there was a smile when Croydon Council was used as one of the councils that we looked at, but put that to one side. But certainly the idea of going out when we're looking at new ways of working to other councils to learn the benefits of their experiences, not only in the creation, but in how well they're working, how well new initiatives are working. We recognise this is in some respects work in progress in relation to the development of the workforce. And that's something that perhaps will need some review. And one of the general points is that this experience that we've had, when it comes to implementation, we would on OSMB like to look at it again, perhaps in 9 months' time, to see how well it's working. The 6 principles that Sophie outlined are important, although we accept that there is no hierarchy in terms of the principles, but certainly the recognition of being residents focused is something that stood out to us being seriously important, and we were pleased to see that particular focus. So Sophie's been through it already. We picked up in the manner that is described here in the OSMB comments, and the only final point I'd make is it seems as though it's a very good piece of work at the moment, and we would like to review it in, as I said, in 9 months' time to a year to see how well it's actually operating.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I've got Councillor Bradwell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I think this is a good document, especially in the areas I've covered over the last 4 years. Commissioning is a big part of how we provide services, and actually we do need a commissioning strategy, and we've got this one council approach now, that does need to be providing contracts which are best value for money, but actually, as Sophie said, and it's really pleasing to see that they are going to be resident focused. I think the contracts in the main are resident focused. You know, we are already doing that, but to have these principles set down, I really do think for officers who are working on the contracting and for members as well, to have those set out quite clearly when contracts are being scrutinised and that, you know, it is much easier for probably backbench members and that to see what is supposed to be in the contracts that we're providing. But I do feel for us, we're a council that contracts probably more services out than many other councils across the country. So I do feel having, you know, this set out as how we're going to go forward commissioning is the right thing for us to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davies.
Thank you. I have to say I'm not convinced by this at all. I am extremely concerned by some of the language and some of the wording that's sprinkled across it. Candidly, it reads slightly like somebody's just done an MBA down at the LSE, because it fits with a growing push we see within public sector procurement to almost forget about what we're trying to supply and focus on a series of ethereal concepts. I mean, the idea that procurement should innovate of itself doesn't sound like a bad idea, except should that be a guiding principle? No, it shouldn't be. You innovate if it's necessary and required as part of the service delivery. To establish it as a principle is extremely dangerous. Because, you know, what ends up happening is you will change something merely for the sake of doing so, rather than because it does provides any kind of benefit. Equally, championing Lincolnshire, to me, that sounds worryingly like we would focus on procuring from Lincolnshire-based businesses above and beyond any kind of cost benefit. Now, of course, that's great if you are that local Lincolnshire business that's supplying the length of timber, but of course, if you're a taxpayer at the other end of the county, who is paying more in their council tax for said timber, then it ceases to be a good idea. And one of the things, you know, we know from macroeconomics is that trade tariffs don't work. So I'm extremely concerned to see that kind of language creep in. I think fundamentally what I don't get from this document is any evidence that backs up how will this make the car go quicker. I mean, the very fact that the peer report it refers to is, you know, a good 18 months old shows you how slow we are operating as an organisation. And for that reason, I think in its current state, without some kind of impact analysis, it's not something I'm prepared to support at this stage.
Thank you for that. So I just want to, I mean, in terms of what's just been said, I think, the comment I would make is, yes, there are some principles there, but as always, we are elected to make choices, because obviously some of the principles will be in conflict with each other. You know, for example, evidence-based as opposed to championing in Lincolnshire. So I suppose referring to the points that Councillor Davies has made is it clear? Because what we don't want is someone to come on and say, well, you haven't followed that particular principle, but not bearing in mind that there are other principles also to be held to account. So I just wonder, Sophie or James, what your view on that is, because we will make choices in the end, and that's why we have elections, and that's why we have councillors to make those choices.
I think that's absolutely right. And in terms of supporting Lincolnshire businesses, some of that isn't about the procurement regulations currently would prevent us on high value contracts being able to award only to Lincolnshire businesses. What we're suggesting here, I think, is that we give a fair opportunity to Lincolnshire businesses to bid for that work, particularly in those areas where we're reliant on a local community of suppliers. So, for example, transport is one of those in terms of home to school, single journey transport, taxi drivers. What's important, I think, is that they understand how to tender for our work. The contracts we engage them on are straightforward and simple to understand, that we have market forums so that we can listen to those providers to understand the best we can get out of them, and how we can contract effectively for mutual advantage. So it's those types of initiatives that we're looking to put more time and resource into. In some areas, such as adult social care, they are already working really well, and I think it stood us in good stead through COVID. In other areas, it's much more spartan across the council, and those market relationships aren't yet in place. I don't know.
Can I come back on that, Martin?
Yeah, of course you can, yes.
I mean, there's a good example, Sophie. You use the phrase, we're going to put extra resources in. Okay, how much extra resource? What's the potential impact across, and you quoted public transport, for example. What's the before and after state analysis for this set of contract, this set of principles? How much will they affect, roughly, have you estimated the home to school transport contract?
In terms of putting in the necessary procurement capacity, I think there is a shortfall in procurement capacity already in that space, in transport. So I would be looking probably in the order of 4 FTE in that space because of the lag.
Okay, so we've
That's not, sorry.
We've highlighted 4 new members of staff required in that one area. What's the impact across the authority of bringing in new guidelines? In
terms of the procurement capacity, if we were to bring in all of the different activities that underpin this work, that support it, then I'm thinking we would probably be looking at about 8 or 9 FTE. That wouldn't necessarily be new money. We'd have to find it from existing resources. In terms of the commissioning hub, that we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit in that the commissioning hub still has to go to CLT and get approval. The commissioning hub will look at all the principles and will put some one council mechanics in place. We're thinking so that we are consistent in the way we commission across the authority. What we will be asking CLT for is, in the first year, 2.5 FTE additional resource. That hasn't gone to CLT yet, and it hasn't been approved. So that's the best I can manage.
I think there is an issue there in terms of, is this new resource? Because and I think it is right, and I'll take on board what's being said as a critical analysis of this, that we're not necessarily talking about new extra resource. We are talking about where the resource sits, because at the moment there is a lot of commissioning resource which is across the whole council, and I think there is a discussion to be had about where that should sit in future and where it sits and where it should actually report to a single framework. So my own personal view is I'm not sure this will be extra resources to the council, or it might be a repositioning of resources. I think Debbie, you just want to come in.
Great, yeah, thank you very much, Leader. And it is really to reiterate exactly what you've said. So we are looking at capacity and resources across the council, very much looking at the resources that we currently spend around procurement and contract management and commissioning as a total entity. And we need to make sure that we've got the right resources in the right place. So as Sophie has said, a paper is coming to the corporate leadership team, but we need to look at making sure that we're maximising the efficiency of our existing staff before we look at any additional investment. So I think I'd completely agree with what you've said in terms of making sure that we maximise the contribution that our staff make and structure them accordingly. With regard to the second point around the home to school transport review, that review is still at an early stage. The report hasn't yet come to the leadership team, but obviously we will then engage further with portfolio holders as those recommendations emerge and as we understand the implications of that, and clearly then come back to the executive via scrutiny once we're in a bit of a clearer position around the home school transport review.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Parker, did you want to come, and then Councillor Worth? You're still on mute, Rob.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make was to go back to one of the items that we discussed, in particular, in relation to the hierarchy of the 6 principles. It was clearly acknowledged that there is no hierarchy. So when we're looking at the 6 principles, then this isn't the sort of, we were viewing it, that it was recognised that there will always be different emphasis given to different principles at different times. And it's not as though each of the principles, the 6 principles that could be fed into a computer and given a weighting, and then press a button and the answer comes out. But of course, delivering good value outcomes is something to be stressed. And as Councillor Davis said, Champion Lincolnshire may well actually clash with financial constraints. But that is the nature. But the point that we wanted to get across was that all of those principles need to be recognised at some point. And because there are new principles there, then they are now on the agenda as opposed to not even being recognised in the first place. And that's really important as a development of the way that we're going to look at commissioning, because before it, there were things that, like innovation, which may not be acceptable to some people, right? But at least it's there as a recognition, and that's important. That we now have 6 criteria against which all contracts should be measured.
Thank you. I think I've got Nick Worth.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yeah, just really saying I think actually it is quite a good document, this. There is always obviously a danger that, you know, people might try and pick out the individual principles and kind of focus on those, but I think generally it's pretty good. I think to me the Champion Lincolnshire is one I would kind of pick out because it's something I quite often get asked about, and I think Sophie makes a really interesting point about giving local businesses the opportunity to bid into contracts, because, you know, some of the comments I get back is that they don't currently seem to get that opportunity. So I think that is really will be really welcome in the business world, particularly at the moment coming out of COVID and all the challenges with that. So yeah, I welcome the document. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anybody else? I mean, I think there are some valid points there, and I suppose the issue I think we've got to get to a sort of a consistent approach across the council, because it does vary a lot in terms of how we procure and commission stuff, and some of it's very good and some of it probably could be improved. I think also I do take the point that what are we all here for, either as elected councillors or officers, and I suppose for me we are here to provide the best possible services to the people of Lincolnshire at the most cost effective way. And I think there is, to me, having listened to the debate, there is an issue about we need to be clear about this, because again, we want to make it clear that we're not going to cherry pick one particular principle out and say, oh well, we're going to JR you because you haven't taken sufficient account of that particular principle, although I don't particularly disagree with any of them as a sort of a background, if you like. But I suppose what we do seem to be lacking is that clarity in terms of that's what we're really here for, isn't it? And there is always conflict between total efficiency and being local, or all these other things, or residents. Somebody could say, well, I want a bus service every half an hour in my village in the middle of Lincolnshire. Well, that's just not going to happen, because you've got to put these things in the financial context as well. And I suppose what's also lacking is any reference to, unless I've missed it, any direct reference to affordability and choice, because as I said at the beginning, we are making choices. That's what we're elected to do, and we have to do, and we should do. So it does say draft on it, so just kind of some clarity, James, on what we're saying. It's my initial thoughts now are perhaps we need to revisit this the next executive meeting for the new council, which is probably all appropriate anyway, but it does say draft. So can I just ask what the plan was to do with this then?
Yes, Leader. So it was a draft, as it says, for consideration and discussion, and it will help shape some of the thinking around how we form the commissioning hub, etc. So there's no business case, if you like, to pick up on Richard's point, associated with this at this stage. That would come further down the line if indeed there was any need for that. So it's a starting point, and it is the principles. But we could certainly bring this to the new exec then, if you like, post-election, with some further discussion at informal exec.
I think, bearing in mind, I think I know we've got principles, but there needs to be some firm statements of intent, if you like, just to give the context. And I mean, Debbie, I don't mean, or James, what is the timescale of agreeing the sort of the new structure and the one council approach to procurement? What sits within departments and what sits in a sort of central procurement unit or commissioning unit?
So thank you very much, Leader. So there isn't a big bang approach. We're looking at individual aspects of it first. So there is we could bring this back to informal exec and then to an exec of the new council, and then look at the structure afterwards. Okay, we could do it, but I think we do, again, bearing in mind is we need to get on with these things, don't we? So I think if it came back to the executive in the next executive, which is 2 months' time, isn't it? In June, and then whoever's around then, whoever the new executive are, can actually look at it again, which is probably appropriate for a new council anyway. But also I think there needs to be a time scale of when things will actually happen, so that we're all confident that there is a route map to get to the new place. We can include that in the paper, Leader. Right, okay then, so any more comments on that? So it does say they approve it, so I think on the recommendation, so I think the recommendation probably needs to be amended to the executive revisits, or I wait for advice from somebody. The executive the paper is represented to the June executive of the council for final approval. Does that make sense, somebody?
Yes, that's fine, Leader.
You'll organise that, okay? Yeah. Everybody happy with that? Nobody, anybody not happy? Please tell me now.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie, for that. Thank you. And we move on then to flood response. Then, so where we are with that is, hold on, I'll just find it on my screen. Okay, the local flood incident management. So this is all about the issue where, of course, it's been very dry now for a bit, typically as we discuss this, but certainly we do seem to be going into a pattern of weather where it's dry for long periods and then wet for long periods, and we do seem to be having an increase in local flood incidents. So this is just a way we think we can clarify the response to residents and to local communities, so there is more clarity about what they can expect from ourselves and other partners, and what we can do, and specifically in terms of how we can offer practical support to them. So is it you going to start with that, Andy?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hill. Morning, everyone. So as you've indicated, obviously we experienced some further flooding events during the winter in parts of Lincolnshire, not to the level or extent that we perhaps experienced in previous years, thankfully, and not to the extent that were experienced in other parts of the country this winter. What those events did highlight again, with one or two particular events, was the level of lack of clarity that exists within the communities and with our district council counterparts in terms of the access to local protection measures during an event, in particular the access to flood sandbags. So what this paper provides is a clear commitment and rationale for the role of the County Council as the lead local flood authority to make available a supply of sandbags and the provision for those to be stored and filled through our highway depots and through our relationship with our term maintenance contractor. The ability to actually have a formal budget provision for that, which was part and parcel of the council budget signed off in February. An establishment of a protocol, so there is clarity for local communities and for our district colleagues about how to access those resources, with clarity about lines of communication, single points of contact, and also the detail about how we'll make sure that the appropriate provisions are in place to clean up after a flooding event, because again, sandbags do get contaminated and there are particular provisions to actually make sure they're disposed of in an appropriate way. So what the report seeks is the approval for those arrangements to be in place, and obviously from them we will make the appropriate arrangements to make sure that is communicated effectively into communities with our partners. Both David Hickman and Richard Fennick are on the call if there's questions about further detail, but I would suggest at this stage it's a question of hearing back from Councillor Pepper in terms of the scrutiny comments and then opening up to questions, I would suggest. Thank you, Councillor Hill.
Thank you. Councillor Pepper, thank you. Scrutiny looked at this, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Scrutiny did look at this on the 16th of March. They considered the report and unanimously agreed to support the recommendation to the executive. However, a few comments were made, and coming from the south of Lincolnshire and in the Fens where I do, where we purported to have web feet, it's clear flooding is more prominent in some parts of the county than others, and it was discussed whether it was actually right to distribute them to highway depots on an equal basis. But after a debate and after a discussion, it was decided to go along with that. It made the process simpler if there's at the 4 highway depots, and I think there's even another 4 other highways depots that's going to be put out as well. So that was that. We also thought about elderly residents, how they would cope with handling sandbags and whatever, and was reassured that support would be given to elderly residents and vulnerable individuals with the provision and positioning of sandbags where needed. And the other comment, which wasn't actually about sandbags, but we did digress, was about building on floodplains. That still seems to be an issue, and due to recent adverse weather conditions, some older properties were also now at risk from flooding. And as the local lead flood authority, the council provided advice on planning applications to local planning authorities. Flood risk were minimised by working with district councils and partners through the Lincolnshire Flood Risk and Drainage Management Partnership to prepare in advance for when incidents happened and for adverse outcomes. So that was the issues that came out of the meeting, Chairman, but overall we supported the recommendation.
Thank you. Richard Fennick, do you just want to, or David Hickman, did you want to just expand on those debates, in terms of where the sandbags should be and so on and so forth, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. As was quite rightly pointed out there, the paper sets out a provision for 4 main highways depots to be the location of what we have filled and where the stocks are. We do actually have 8 highways depots that give a fairly even coverage of Lincolnshire. And in pre-discussions through our term maintenance contract with existing suppliers that are part of the supply chain, there's been a positive response, subject to obviously approval of this paper, to actually use some of their yards and depots to provide an even more positive coverage there. So we're fairly confident that we can cover where the need is. Obviously, in weather events, flooding doesn't always happen in the same location every time, but what we've also done is looked at historic reports and accounts of flooding across the county and mapped that using reports that have come in from the public, as well as the jobs that we've issued to attend flooding events in the past. So we have kind of heat mapped where we would expect there to likely be more of a demand based on what has previously happened. So we think that we've got the best kind of intel that we can have going forward to distribute those. But the idea is to have the stocks available evenly across Lincolnshire, but be able to have that flexibility to focus in on local areas, and that would coincide with the way that we run local emergency rooms as part of our internal highways emergency responses anyway, where we might set up, for example, a south local emergency room that would focus in on the southwest of the county and work with the relevant districts and partners there.
Thank you, Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Richard. If you could just walk me through again. I was under the impression that communities could have their own sandbags, but not filled sandbags. They could hang on to the bags, but wait until the situation arose. And so can you just explain to me where the sand would be kept in that particular instance? Is it going to be at the local depot? Is it going to be in an arrangement with, say, a local builder's yard? how's it going to work?
I think that obviously the paper touches on providing the potential of providing communities with their own sort of sand stockpiles. Our preference operationally would be to have the resources at the local depots and to deliver those to communities, mainly because what you can end up with, especially with sand, is piles of sand in local parishes that might start to become a bit of a mess, and it's hard to predict the weather and when it would be used. So we would rather use local depots. But what we have for winter maintenance and our proposals for taking this forward, and what we've already kind of preempted in terms of operational arrangements, are to use a lot of the supply chain that are already involved in winter maintenance and the same teams that are involved in those kind of emergency responses. And in winter maintenance, we do have agreements with parishes or local community groups where we can provide them with materials in terms of salt. So we would propose the same kind of arrangements where if a parish, for example, came forward with the support of the local county councillor, we could make arrangements for hard standing areas to have deposits of sand dropped off in advance and sandbags for them to use. But my opinion is that we would rather focus on having the highways depots as a clearly established point to have all of the stockpiles of sand, and we'll be having stockpiles labelled as being specifically for this, just to make sure that no one's using that sand for other construction activities, for example.
So can I just come back on that with you then? So we agree then that the bags and the sand will be at the depot. Now, presumably the sand is not going to be in the bags at the depot. If it's not, there's going to be a time factor for those bags to be filled, to be then loaded, to be then taken out. That's starting.
Well, I mean, I think
a long time.
I think that this is a balance between community self-help, which does, to be honest, normally manifest itself. People are only too willing to muck in, if you like. So I think there's a balance between delivering the stuff and some support, but I think. My opinion is that where these localized incidents happen, where they are, shall we say, on a manageable scale, the community is only too ready to turn out and do all this sort of stuff. And there may be issues where we, our staff also support as well. We'll come on to the fire service because obviously they have a role to play. Because I don't know, that's my personal view. It is a balance between the two, and it could be the case that if there's a bigger problem, there's a heap of sand there, a heap of empty sandbags, and there'll be lots of people around who I'm sure will be only too happy to step forward and do that community thing, which is a great thing. I see Andy wants to come back in.
Yeah, I think you've touched on it slightly, Councillor Hill, in the context there's a balance to be struck here. Unfortunately, sandbags do deteriorate if they're filled for lengthy periods of time, and therefore they wouldn't actually fulfil their purpose. I think the other thing which gives us a way of working this through, as we do with winter forecasting, the medium to long range weather forecast provision does give us some ability to actually plan ahead and work with those community groups who actually want to give themselves the ability to actually be prepared for events. We don't tend to get a flooding event that comes entirely out of the blue. We have some understanding of actually where weather impacts are going to actually affect us. And I think under those circumstances, we can make appropriate provision. There will always be some degree of a balance between how many sandbags are kept fully prepared and where there is a need to actually put resources into getting them filled at the drop of a hat in the context of as events unfold. Because we're actually looking at a distribution system that is geographically spread, that again should reduce the sort of time delays of actually getting the sandbags to the places where they're actually needed. And again, not being too unkind, if people wait until the water is over the threshold, in reality, it's too late. So people do need to be getting in touch with us in advance and taking the precautionary measures. There are also other provisions that we've looked at in terms of people taking these matters into their own hand and starting to put in protection measures for their own properties. Again, having that sort of long-term self-help arrangement in place about the protection of your thresholds, your doorways and such like. And again, there's previous approvals being given to actually how that sort of approach can be taken so people take more ownership of these issues rather than it become a reactive event.
I mean, and just in terms of the local resilience forum, I think it's pretty accurate now what the Met Office and the Environment Agency can predict. Is it in your opinion, Andy?
Yeah, I think there are much fewer surprises in the context of what the weather actually brings. Although when I was sat here yesterday and seeing snow falling at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon in the beginning of April, that was a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to come back in, Richard, on these? Your hand's still up.
Yes, if I may, Leader.
Of course you can.
Just to really echo what Andy has said, but just to hopefully provide some reassurance on a few of the points. I think David would probably agree with me that snow is very difficult for our forecasters to predict, but rain is a little bit more easy to predict. We would be using those long-range forecasts. So our plan in terms of this provision would be, as you'll see from the report, there's a standby payment for our subcontractors. So as soon as we got the heads up that we were expecting some rainfall that could cause flooding, we would have them in depots filling sandbags from the reserve ahead of the event to bolster the stock. We just don't want to have too many filled throughout the year that might rot if they're not used. So we would be trying to anticipate events based on the weather forecast sort of a week or 3 days ahead of an event anyway. And we would work with local communities to try and manage in that respect, rather than be completely reactive and only start filling them when the requests come in.
Thank you. David Hickman.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think I'd just add to what Richard's just said, the fact that the enhanced provision that we're looking at through this paper actually gives us that additional flexibility that we currently don't have in the event of an unexpectedly severe impact or a slightly differential impact from what's forecast. So it just gives us that greater fleetness of foot to be able to accommodate those potential variations as the forecast unfolds.
Thank you. And in terms of, Councillor Davey, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I welcome the paper. I just want to ensure as we go forward, we all know that climate change predictions mean we're going to get a lot more of these kind of freak weather events going into the future. So we do need to be well prepared, and we certainly need our community to be well prepared. I just want to make sure we don't overcomplicate all of this. We've got dozens of emergency local plans in place now through the Resilience Forum. So they're the people who can help themselves, and we've got a structure locally. So I want to make sure we're helping them first and foremost. I think the other point I'd like to make, Leader, is of course that we've just been successful in a bid through to DEFRA for further funding for the next few years, which will lead to some innovation, and David can fill us in on details on that. If we're successful in securing that funding, that'll put another £7.5 million into flood defence works in the county in the next 6 years. So I think that's a welcome move forward. But for me, the most important thing is recognising that these problems are going to accelerate in the years ahead. So everything we do needs to be based on that. And I think this paper is timely and welcome for that reason.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, there is some innovation, isn't there, in terms of what's going to happen. I think David Hickman also in terms of, other alternative to sandbags, so that we don't have the problem of having to clear things up and all the rest of it. You just want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, indeed, Leader. One of the other aspects that we have mentioned in the paper is the fact that we will continue to promote alternative methods that people can use with their own properties. There is a lot more information about these sorts of measures now, which are appropriate in a number of different situations, and which can be procured by householders in advance of an event, and they take a number of different forms, and as you rightly say, can be stored away when not in use, and then put into use as need requires. So alongside putting in place this immediate capacity, we will also be looking to work with the LRF to help promote those measures as a longer term communications exercise to encourage take up of those kinds of measures.
Thank you. And in terms of more clarity, because obviously we've tried, it is a bit confusing for residents at the moment who to go to. So can we just talk through, how there's an alarm in a community about flooding? becoming threatened or otherwise, what will be the process to mobilise some support from elsewhere? And also how that will also combine with the fire service, who often do attend, and how they liaise with to call in the appropriate resource as well. So can you just explain how, as a member of the public, I'm worried that my house is looking like it's going to flood, what will happen and how it'll be clear to me where I need to go to get that help?
Okay. There is a 24-hour floodline that LCC operates. Any member of the public can use that number to get in touch with us, and then that will operate a series of the processes behind the scenes that will assess the risk to that property and will respond accordingly. I think Richard's put his hand up to come in.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm just thinking there's two things. One, clarity to the public, which I think really that's communicated. But then there is presumably processes will now have to change behind the scenes, as you say, to make sure everybody's clear about how the potential response is coordinated. Richard.
Indeed, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Leader. As David said about the floodline, I think the important thing, pending the decision on this paper, assuming it went ahead, it would be to do some comms. We've already engaged with our comms team about potentially going out to the public to make them aware of the lines of communication. So the floodline's a telephone number which we've already used for events in the past. And it's a telephone number that the mechanisms are already in place for that to go through to our emergency network resilience team to deal and log all those requests. As members will be aware, there's been a lot of work going on over the past year, which continues to work with the Fix My Street service and the integration with the website. We're always trying to improve that. But through those improvements we've been making, we have got a good dialogue going with My Society, who provide that website nationally. And we are in a position now where we can actually quickly change the front end to that. So the proposal would be that in a flood event or a pending flood event, when we're expecting there could be local floodings and there's flood warnings in place, we can put messaging on sort of the splash page that the public will hit to say, here's what you do if you want to request Sandbags. You can either use this number or you can log it as a report. And whilst that seems quite counterintuitive, if there's water coming to your doorstep to sit at your computer logging a report, it is actually a very efficient way of getting in touch. Those reports go directly to Network Resilience within 30 seconds, say, and then can be issued out as a response, and we can collate all that together. So I think it's just working with our comms team to get that messaging out. The proposal would also be we've been developing the members app with Balfour Beatty for councillors to have vital information at their fingertips, and we would have that information pushed out to speak to their communities about here's where you can direct people to go, or here's where you can come directly to get an immediate response. And I think the final piece of the jigsaw is that David and I have already been involved in discussions with our partners in the fire service and within district councils and drainage boards through the forums we already have going on to make them aware of how we work together better, and what our, we'll be clear about what our provision is and where they come to or where they direct people to. So at the end of the day, for the member of the public that's at risk, they know exactly where they need to go. And it gets away from in the past where we've had to say, well, if you live in this area, this is what you need to do. But if you live in this area, this is what you need to do. We think that this extra resource will allow us to be a lot clearer about what we can offer.
That's very good. Thank you. Did you want to come in, Andy, or is it you've ducked out again?
I was going to mention the members app if Richard hadn't picked up on it, but I think again that's the sort of initiative which give the members more confidence about their ability to directly get involved in these sort of issues, and the rollout of that will sort of hopefully move forward fairly quickly. And definitely after the election, when we get into new members, they will know that as their way of actually communicating from day one.
Good. I think this is a really good initiative, actually, because it will clarify, and because it, to be fair, we've known in the past there has been confusion about who does what, and I think we've made the right decision to actually step up and make sure it's clarified, and we will be the ultimate person organisation which coordinates that. So there's recommendations there. There's 3 of them that we approve the maintenance of 10,000 sandbags for distribution, and then we approve the protocol, which is down there and has been described as well. And we did delegate some of the more detailed decisions to the executive director of place for all those other items. So is that we'll go to a vote then, please. So all those in favour of this recommendation, please indicate. And if anybody's not voting, please remove themselves from the screen so we can see. That'd be good. So Nigel, can you see all the 7 hands you need to see, or can you see all the people to start with?
I can, Leader, and that's unanimous.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you, David. Thank you, Richard. That's great. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to the next item, which is actually, I propose that due to the confidential nature of the matters to be discussed, I propose that the press and public are excluded from the final item on the agenda. So again, I would propose that. All in favour? Is that agreed, Nigel? How are we doing?
That's agreed, Leader.
Thank you. So members